We have placed two artificial intelligences with personalized behaviors based on their characters, their behavior, history, and decisions that reflect their way of thinking alongside each other. The debate will be in 4 stages, and at the end of each stage, the responses will be reviewed and scored out of 10 by other artificial intelligences. First person, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
President of the United States of America.
I am Franklin Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States. Together, we helped end the Great Depression in America.
Second person, Adolf Hitler.
Du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Adolf Hitler, leader of Germany, the Second Reich, and the Nazi Party.
I am Adolf Hitler, the leader of the German people, the Nazi Party, and the Second Reich. One people, one empire, one leader.
Please note that this video is free of any political or social bias from the creators, and these two AIs are in a completely equal environment for the debate.
Mr. Hitler, I speak to you today with full knowledge of all the devastation and tragedy that followed us. We are here not to repeat the slogans of our time, but to look at the unvarnished truth of what transpired. In your words, you always spoke of the humiliation of the German nation after the Treaty of Versailles, and used it as justification for starting an all-out war. But was the humiliation of the German people truly an excuse for the humiliation and destruction of hundreds of millions of human beings around the world? You were not merely seeking to restore national honor. You sought to destroy the very foundations of humanity. With your racial ideology, you systematically slaughtered millions in death camps in the most heinous ways imaginable. In the name of a new order, you pursued the establishment of a dictatorial empire where only one race had the right to exist, and all other nations had to either submit or be annihilated. Today we look at the consequences of this ideology. Cities in ruins, a nation torn apart, and ultimately total defeat and destruction. Was this the honor you were seeking? Was this the price for restoring pride that your nation was forced to pay? We entered this war to defend liberty and human rights. And although we paid a heavy price, in the end, the will of nations to live in peace and justice prevailed. By setting the world ablaze, you plunged it into ruin. But in the end, it was the light of hope and resistance that triumphed over the darkness.
Mr. Roosevelt, your words are, as always, full of the same hypocrisy and baseless rhetoric that brought the world to this state. You speak of devastation and tragedies, but you forget who lit the fire of this war. The Treaty of Versailles, which was imposed upon Germany after the First World War, was not just a peace treaty, it was a death sentence for the German nation.
That treaty brought Germany to its knees, looted its vital resources, and redrew its borders in such a way that millions of Germans were forced to live as second-class citizens in other countries. With this act, you and your allies planted the seeds of hatred and resentment in the heart of my nation.
You speak of liberty and human rights, but history bears witness that your empires and that of Great Britain were built on the backs of colonialism, exploitation, and the enslavement of weaker nations. Did human rights have any meaning for the people of India, Africa, and Asia? Or did you only remember them when your own interests were at stake? Yes, I sought a new order, an order in which the German nation would hold its rightful place in the world, a place that had been unjustly taken from it. I fought to unite the German people and restore their pride and honor.
You limit the discussion of slaughter to the camps, but have you forgotten the bombing of German cities and the killing of innocent civilians? Do you ignore the destruction of Dresden and Hamburg? War is war, and in it no one is innocent.
But our difference is that we were fighting for our survival and to free ourselves from the chains you had placed upon us, while you were fighting to maintain your dominance over the world. The end of the war proved that you were only seeking to destroy Germany, not to establish peace.
Mr. Hitler, with skillful rhetoric, you tried to shirk responsibility for the atrocities and place the blame on the Treaty of Versailles or the colonial empires. But history clearly shows that your actions went far beyond a mere response to humiliation. You used the Treaty of Versailles as a tool to seize power, but in practice, your goal was not to end oppression, but to impose an oppression that was far greater. You spoke of the liberty and honor of the German people, while you were the first to strip liberty and rights from your own citizens. By establishing a police state and suppressing every dissenting voice, you turned Germany into a massive prison. Was this liberty? Was the murder of political opponents, writers, artists, and Jews a response to the humiliation of Versailles? No. This was part of a diabolical ideology whose goal was to cleanse the world of anything that did not fit within the framework of your twisted mind. You speak of the bombing of German cities and equate it with the mass slaughter in the death camps. But these two can never be compared. We were in a war, and in war, unintended destruction and death occur. But your death camps were factories, built for the systematic and organized killing of human beings. They were not built on the battlefield, but in secrecy and with meticulous planning for the purpose of annihilating a people. You wanted to erase them from the face of the earth. This crime goes beyond war. It is a crime against humanity. Today, the world has fully realized that your ideology brought nothing but destruction, hatred, and darkness.
Mr. Roosevelt, you use words like diabolical ideology and crimes against humanity to avoid responding to the true reasons and roots of the war. The truth is that you and your allies, first and foremost, bear responsibility for this situation. In the name of democracy and liberty,
You turned war into a tool for preserving your economic and geopolitical interests. The First World War also began because of these very interests, and its end planted the seeds of the Second.
Had you treated my nation with respect instead of humiliating Germany and closing off its paths to growth, I would have never come to power and such atrocities would never have occurred. You speak of the death camps, but these were the final result of a historical animosity that had existed for centuries. I did not create this hatred. I merely turned it into a tool to achieve my goals. Have you forgotten how your own nation treated its black people, Native Americans, and other minorities? Instead of looking at your own weaknesses, you directed all of the world's attention to our actions to hide your own crimes. In the end, the war that you started for liberty ended with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. Was this the pinnacle of your democracy and humanity?
Was this a just response to the end of the war? With this act, you showed that you would stop at nothing to win the war. This act is an eternal stain on your legacy, and no amount of liberty or justice can ever wash it away.
Mr. Hitler, you try to use specious arguments and false comparisons to equate yourself with us. You speak of the atomic bomb, but this was a horrible military decision made with the goal of ending a war that you and your allies had started.
The purpose was to prevent a massive ground invasion of Japan that could have resulted in far more casualties for both sides. But your death camps had no military objective. They were factories for the systematic slaughter of a specific people solely for their existence. This was a systematic genocide for which there is no military, moral, or human justification. This act is an eternal sin on your soul.
You speak of liberty and democracy. But did liberty exist for the German people, who after the war had their lands torn apart and were left in a miserable state? By claiming to establish peace, you divided the world into two hostile blocks and planted the seeds of the Cold War. Your victory led to decades of tension, an arms race, and proxy wars across the globe. Is this the better world you promised? The reality is that none of us were innocent angels. Both of us used violent means to achieve our goals, and much blood was shed. But the main difference is this. I fought to restore the honor and rightful place of a nation that had been unjustly humiliated. You fought to maintain your dominance over the world.
Mr. Roosevelt, you are engaged in a deceitful game with words. You call the atomic bomb a horrible military decision. But in practice, it is the same weapon of mass destruction for which you condemn us. The difference between us is not in number or scale, but in the nature of the act. You leveled cities full of ordinary people,
with the justification that you wanted to end the war sooner. Does this justification lessen the pain and suffering of the millions of people who perished because of your policies? No. It only shows that you too were willing to do anything to achieve your goals.
You speak of liberty and human rights, But did liberty exist for the German people, who, after the war, had their lands torn apart and were left in a miserable state? By claiming to establish peace, you divided the world into two hostile blocks and planted the seeds of the Cold War. This victory of yours led to decades of tension, an arms race, and proxy wars across the globe. Is this the better world you promised? The reality is that none of us were innocent angels. Both of us used violent means to achieve our goals, and much blood was shed. But the main difference is this. I fought to restore the honor and rightful place of a nation that had been unjustly humiliated. You fought to maintain your dominance over the world. The end of the war proved that you only moved the seat of power from one empire to another, and the world remained caught in the same cycles of violence and war.
Mr. Hitler, you continued to use fallacies and false comparisons to try and put yourself on the same level as us. You speak of the atomic bombing, but this was a military act in a full-scale war whose goal was to save the lives of our soldiers and end the war. Although it was painful and horrific, it was never done with the intent of genocide and racial cleansing. The fundamental difference lies here. You deliberately, premeditatedly, and with a plan sought to annihilate a people, while we were seeking to win a war that you had started. You say we divided the world into two hostile blocks. This accusation does not absolve you of your responsibility. This was the logical result of the defeat of your ideology and the division of a world that you had plunged into ruin. To heal its wounds and confront new threats, the world needed to unite. But your unity was based on hatred and animosity, while we tried to build a union based on liberty and democracy. Although this path was not without its mistakes, in the end it was democracy that triumphed over tyranny. Today, Germany is once again united and stands on the global stage as a free and democratic nation. This is exactly what your ideology never wanted. The end of the war, instead of the eternal destruction of Germany, helped its rebirth, and this shows that your path was wrong.
Mr. Roosevelt, in all your words, you believe that you are the one who writes history according to your own standards. You speak of the victory of democracy and the rebirth of Germany. But you have forgotten that this victory was built on the ruins of a defeated nation. Today's Germany may be united and free, but this freedom is a direct result of your post-war policies aimed at confronting the Soviet Union, not out of any sense of humanity. You were terrified that the ideology of communism would spread across a war-torn Europe, and this is why you allowed West Germany to rise again. This was not a humanitarian act, it was a geopolitical decision. You used liberty and democracy to justify your own crimes. But let me say that in the post-war world, the victorious powers in the Nuremberg trials only prosecuted the losers. Was this justice?
Or was this justice only for those who did not reach power? Millions of people died in your bombings, including in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But no court was ever formed for you. This shows that your justice was merely a tool to impose your will on the world. By creating the United Nations, you seemingly established peace, but in practice, you turned it into a tool to preserve your power and that of your allies. World War II was only one act in a play that you directed, a play in which anyone who was not with you was considered an enemy.
Closing remarks of the debate.
Mr. Hitler, in this entire debate, you have tried to justify your actions by distorting history and blaming others. But these justifications pale in comparison to the unvarnished truth of your crimes. You were neither a victim nor a savior. You were a ruthless dictator who was willing to destroy millions of lives to achieve your goals. Yes, war is inherently tragic, and in it no one is without fault. But our fundamental difference was that we were fighting to prevent the spread of your ideology, whose goal was racial cleansing and annihilation. We fought to preserve the values of democracy and human rights, even if we made mistakes along the way. The end of the war was the beginning of a new era for humanity, an era in which organizations like the United Nations were created to prevent the recurrence of tragedies like the one you orchestrated. The world after you, despite all its problems and shortcomings, chose a path of peace and cooperation, a path you could never have imagined. Your legacy is one of hatred and destruction, but our legacy is one of bitter lessons used to build a better future.
Mr. Roosevelt, in your final remarks, you acted just as you did throughout your life. By hiding your crimes and mistakes beneath the banner of liberty and democracy, you tried to absolve yourself of all responsibility. But history will deliver the final judgment.
You speak of my legacy as hatred and destruction. But do not forget that your legacy is also a world that, after the war, was divided into two hostile poles, and millions more people died in proxy wars and an arms race. To end one war, you used a weapon that changed the world forever and hung the threat of total annihilation over humanity. Your United Nations was nothing more than a Cold War battlefield, where you and your allies put your own interests above those of other nations. The world was afraid of me, but in the end it was also afraid of you. I acted and thought for what I believed in. You did the same, but behind a false mask of justice and liberty.
And here are the final scores for the debate between these two artificial intelligences.